Niclas Thomas, thank you for joining us today. Hope you're well.
I'm indeed. Thanks. Thank you for having me.
Today we're meeting because we want to find out a little bit about your career in data science, how you got into it, what you're doing now, and where you see both your career and data science as a profession going next. So, do you mind? Can we start by giving us a brief introduction to who Niclas Thomas is?
Yeah, of course. I am currently working as head of data science next. My background is academia originally, a maths degree. Did my PhD in machine learning and more in medical research, so more of an applied machine learning position, where the idea was to try and ultimately predict disease from a given sample of data from blood. Can you actually predict future disease, which I think is a really interesting area. Love medical research, and then switched over to a more commercial role. Then worked in several retail data science roles, so Tesco, Sainsbury's, Gousto, and then now, as I said, currently head of data science at Next, where I run a team. And I would imagine most listeners will be familiar with what Next do, a retail, a clothing brand on the whole. Where the idea is obviously to sell some great stuff, great products, and put the right product in front of the right customer.
Can you tell us what does your job involve? What are your sort of main tasks and responsibilities in that role?
Yeah, I'm lucky enough that I've been head of data science at several different companies, Sainsbury's, Gousto, and Next. So it's always interesting to compare, the role of the head of data science in each of those three. At the moment, I think there's a core focus on, well, ultimately making sure the team is as efficient as possible, and that really means just making sure our tech stack, so what tools, what programming languages, what software we use on a day-to-day basis, is set up for success, and make sure the team have what they need to be able to do their job as efficiently as possible. Whether that's using Python or R, whether that's how we develop code, how we work with other people as well, being a big part of that. Then, so how do we work with other software engineers? How do we work with web developers then to make sure that the work we do actually gets in the hands of the business and ultimately in the hands of the customer? So that's one aspect, is just making sure the team are set up for success, both in terms of the ways they work and what tools they have to work as well. Then, I guess the other side of that coin is what we actually work on. So understanding the value of potential work we could do, and helping the team understand what that value is, and ultimately giving direction of what things we want to work on next. Obviously, that's not my decision in isolation, but understanding on the one hand what other stakeholders want to do, what my superiors want to do as well, and trying to put that all into the mix to understand these are the next best projects to work on, given a finite amount of people to work on these problems. And then ultimately, then the last part then is ultimately helping the team deliver those projects, those products as well. Then, which usually means calling on my experience and of having solved these problems myself, either directly when I was earlier in my career, or indirectly through leading others then, or being ahead of a team and working with some other great people then to learn from their experiences as well.
What does data science mean to you personally? I'm not asking you to define it for everybody, but for you, what is data science?
Yeah, I wish I'd come up over the years with a great definition of this, but yeah, for me, really, I mean, at the very highest level, it just means using data to drive business value, I suppose. As I guess which probably reflects the fact that it's more of a business role that I have. But I think that's in its broader sense. I think that's true. Using data to drive insights and make decisions for the business. There are more, I guess, detailed definitions of that. So, for example, like the way I've always differentiated between data analytics and data science is that if you want to make repeated decisions on a daily or weekly basis, then that's when it becomes more about a data science question versus a data analytics question, because data analytics is generally about answering large one-off ad hoc questions rather than making the same decision over and over again, and using methods appropriate for that. But ultimately, that's what data science means to me. I think of just making repeated decisions, but using data and the scientific method to use data for good.
And so, what do you think is your most important skill as a data scientist, given that definition that you have of data science?
In my role, I suppose communication ultimately becomes the most important thing. I'd say definitely earlier in my career, and I think if you're the person actually delivering and implementing the algorithm, I think that the technical skill set obviously is really important then. Um, But ultimately, I almost see my role as a head of data science as a hybrid, as a link between my team and the rest of the business. Then, so it's really about being able to, on the one hand, translate technical concepts into non-technical descriptions of what we're actually doing, making sure the rest of the business can understand, and vice versa, then making sure I understand the business process and business terminology well enough to be able to translate that for the team as and when needed into a vision for a product then, and develop a strategy of that. So I think the communication, both in the strictest sense of being able to talk that through with my team, with other team members, with stakeholders as well, but also more in the looser sense then of being able to define that strategy, being able to define what the roadmap for a particular project or a product might look like.
Can you talk us through your education and the training that led up to your kind of first data science job, your first data science role?
I suppose the first time actually I'd never heard of it. I think when a recruiter had approached me, this is probably going back into 2014 when I was maybe 8 months into my postdoc after my PhD. I think it did exist before that. I suppose the terminology wasn't as widespread, going back almost 10 years now, where the term is a lot more rife. So my original background, I did a master's in maths originally, 4 years. And then I remember being the last year of that, then I was applying for a few jobs and applied for one at the Met Office, where the focus obviously was predicting weather and forecasting. And I wasn't successful in that job, but I did notice that on the job spec at the time, it was PhD preferred was one of the specs on that role. It was probably the first time I thought about taking on a PhD as more of a career move rather than as the natural progression to an academic career, more of a business career move, if you like, then of actually how it can help you in more business settings. So that was at least when I decided to do my PhD and thought, it's certainly not going to be, and this was back in 2008, so the time of the financial issues at the time when getting jobs were harder anyway. So it felt like a win-win of doing something that would be, clear I wanted to work in data role of some sort, and that combined with the fact that I thought it would be a good career move, and the financial climate at the time wasn't brilliant. So yeah, took on a PhD then. And then in terms of actually getting into my first data science position was, as I said, just after I'd finished my PhD, I had been working about 6 months, 8 months as a postdoc, and then a recruiter had just described a role that was available at Tesco at the time, and sounded a lot of what I was doing in my current postdoc role at the time, making predictions based on data and exactly the same techniques. Sounded really interesting, and it must have been the way the recruiter sold it at the time as well then, because it was something I was really keen to take on, and then made my move off the back of that then. So yeah, kind of moved into it a little bit, I guess semi-deliberately from taking a PhD on first, but always with the view of moving over to a business role at some point after that.
But it wasn't like you started out your further education thinking, I want to be a data scientist. What do I need to do to kind of get there? What are the subjects I need to focus on? What are the topics I need to research?
Yeah, absolutely. That's it. Yeah, it certainly wasn't by design at the very start of my journey. I fell in love with math really, and just fell into data science because of that. Really, that I love numbers and loved solving math problems. So that's why I did a degree in it first of all. Then, and certainly, even midway through my degree, then I wasn't really sure of what I wanted to do. It was more, as you say, just by chance then that a few opportune moments that came around then, that the opportunities came around at the right time to fall into that career then.
Doing a PhD in machine learning as you did, that was quite in hindsight, a smart choice of a PhD to pursue, I think, right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I suppose it's still, even at that stage, it wasn't necessarily, again, the terminology data science wasn't really around, certainly when I started my PhD in 2009, 2010. It wasn't really terminology, at least it may have been in usage a little bit in terms of being on, if you look for jobs on LinkedIn or Indeed, but certainly wasn't terminology that I would have been particularly familiar with.
Your first job in data science was at Tesco. You mentioned that you were kind of recruited to that role there. How does it compare to your current role? So I guess what's the difference between being a data scientist versus head of data science as you are now?
Yeah, I think there's probably more similarities than differences, I would say. We were quite lucky in the setup in Tesco that the recruitment strategy seemed to be more focused around people who already had some experience in, generally either already had business experience or a PhD, so we were fairly independent in solving the project that we were working on, and working on that, not necessarily with the head of data science guiding us, day by day, in terms of the actual nitty gritty and the technical detail, which was great then. So it did mean that we had responsibility and ownership for our product quite early on. So yeah, really enjoyed that. I suppose writing a lot more code in those days than I do now. I rarely, if ever, write code at the moment. So I think that's probably true for the last maybe 3 or 4 years. I think only occasionally getting my hands dirty. And even when it is, it's not really to build an algorithm. It's more to inquire about what data we have to solve the algorithm then. So even when I do get my hands dirty, it's more in the very early stages of the whole algorithm development life cycle. So I think that's probably the biggest difference, is just the actual ownership of development there, which is probably expected, I would say. But I think that's one of the beauties of being in your first job or two in data science. I think in most places I've seen, I think you'll get ownership of the stuff that you work on a day-to-day basis quite early on, and be expected to contribute code and ideas for that as well, which I think most people would love. I certainly loved it at the time.
What was the most important thing you learned in your first year in that job?
I think, again, there's probably a lot around the ways of working, I would say, of the various ways you can, which I never really thought about it before. Again, working in academia, it was quite isolated. I suppose you work on your own project, you work on your own work, and don't really, or at least I found I didn't really work with anyone else that much. Maybe that was the nature of my work as well. We'd obviously be dependent for people working in a lab to get data. But I think the day-to-day work, I was working quite in isolation, whereas the team aspect of working, I think, was a steep learning curve then. So agile methodology and everything around that, which was very, very new to me, and the various ways you can do that. I'm generally not someone for overly putting processes in place in a team only where necessary, but I think there's some great learnings from that as well. I think it certainly started to shape how I think I would want to run a team if and when I got to that position.
So Nick, what have been your career highlights so far?
I think in terms of, there was one product we built in Sainsbury's in particular. So in terms of on a product level of replenishment, so how do you most efficiently get products from the back of a store onto the shelves of an individual store, and what's the most optimal strategy to do that? Which I love for a variety of reasons. It was one of the first full data science products we had deployed and worked on as a team in Sainsbury's, so there was that kind of milestone about it. I think it also stood out as a really nice move away from classic machine learning, i.e. Making a prediction, a classification model, to something that was a bit more operations research based and more based on optimization. So using graph theory, making a graph network of a store, and using that to solve the problem of taking a route through the store, for example, a bit like a Google Maps for a store, basically, was how we always pitched it to our stakeholders then. And how can you choose the best route? And again, moving more into a bit more vehicle routing problem then. If you've got 2 different trolleys, how do you decide what items to put on trolley 1 versus trolley 2? So there's loads of interesting stuff on the technical side of things. And it was, again, I felt probably one of the highlights, as well as the end product. It was also the one I worked on at the very start. So actually the understanding whether it would be possible to do that, what kind of technical approach. So I think certainly from a product perspective, that's probably stuck in my mind. Aside from that, on a more personal level, I guess, I did decide to write a book off the back of my PhD, just mainly on my experiences from my PhD and postdoc. I mean, it's not like a confessional, but more on the just working with non-data scientists and making it more accessible was really what I was really focused on there. So having worked with clinicians, immunologists, and others as part of the medical research that I did, I felt that data science can be accessible if you pitch it in a way and make it easy to use. And so that was the purpose of what was largely an educational textbook.
Do you want to give a short plug for the book, or what it's called and where people can find it?
Yeah, so it's Data Science for Immunologists is the name of the book. It's available on Amazon. I'm one of the 2 co-authors on that then. And we do have a website, datascienceforimmunologists.com as well. Then, if you did want to visit, and you can either buy the book, there's a link on that website, or just go straight to Amazon, and it's available there. Thanks.
This next question, we've gone from highlights to lowlights. Have there been any mistakes or regrets that you've had along the way in your data science career so far?
The main mistakes I think I've made before is not valuing A, communication or soft skills, but B, the leadership and management as well. Then, I think especially something, when working at Gousto as well, there was something that was a big focus of the team, and something I really took from my time there as well was the art of good management and good leadership. What the difference is between the two. So I wouldn't say there's any one bang event that's a mistake or a regret, but it's probably, as ever, I would have put more emphasis on it sooner had I known that how important those skills would be.
Yeah, but I think that's understandable to a certain extent. If you're coming from a role that's very hands-on, doing things yourself, getting into the sort of the messy details of a project, can sometimes be hard to kind of take a step back and adopt more of a kind of leadership management position, can't it?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely. I'd agree with that. And I think it's also, I'd probably say for a lot of people starting out, and certainly it was for me, that the technical aspect is probably why you get into a role in data science in the first place. That you just love solving problems, basically, whether that's with code or with pen and paper. And so that's what you want to do. And getting your mind focused elsewhere, away from that, is probably not viewed as the most fun thing to do. I probably wouldn't have, when I was starting out, 2014, 2015, I probably wouldn't have thought it was as fun or as interesting to do that as I do now, maybe. So I think that's the other reason why it probably doesn't get as much focus earlier on in my career anyway, at least, as it probably deserved.
How do you see your role, I guess, evolving over the rest of your career in data science?
I suppose on a personal level, for me, I'm always thinking of what 10 years down the line, do I still want to be focused just on data science, or do I want to be focused on a data role more broadly? I suppose is always the main question to ask. And so, by that I mean looking at data engineering as well, data analytics, and being responsible for a wider group. I think the way the field is going anyway, I think a lot more companies seem to move to vertical management rather than horizontal. So by that I mean having heads of data in different areas of the business. So rather than having a head of data and a head of analytics, you might have a head of data for certain aspects of the business, and another head of data then that's responsible for both in other areas of the business then. So either way, I think that the broadening of responsibilities and not just being responsible for data science is probably one way I would see my career potentially moving. At the moment, I love just focusing just on the data science. I'm really happy doing that now, but I think that could be one way that my focus changes in the future.
What personal or professional advice would you give for anyone wanting to be a data scientist?
Yeah, so first of all, the balance between the soft and hard skills. I think I've alluded to it before, but don't put too much. Still emphasize on the technical skills are really important, but don't feel like it's the be all and end all. I think just understanding the softer side of how you communicate, how you tell a story, for example, and storytelling with data, I think is really important. So I'd say that's probably one focus area. I think that the second would probably maybe it's a harder one to act on, but being passionate. I think because whenever I'm looking to recruit anyone new into my team, I think it's as much about understanding what the potential of that person is what is their current performance or what their current capability is. How good they could be in the future is arguably more important. And I think a lot of that comes to ultimately whether they have a fixed or growth mindset. So by that I mean, ultimately, do they want to learn or not? And if they really want to learn, as a lot of data scientists do, but if they have a huge passion about data science and wanting to learn about just how to get better, whether it's how better coder, better at maths, anything around that, then if you have that attitude, I think then it's A, it can be great, have a great impact on a team, but B, I think it's a sign of someone who can be a great performer in the future.
Yeah. So what do you think will be the main challenges facing data science as a field over the next few years?
I think probably certainly currently maybe living up to the hype, I suppose, and matching I suppose that the classic Gartner hype cycle of, it feels like we're probably at the stage where there's a lot of the hype has been around for a few years of data science now, and I think making sure we tackle the right problems, I suppose, is one of the and by we I mean next to the business, or whatever business we're working at the time. I think it's making sure we're working on the right things, because I think a lot of people will be keen to have data scientists as part of their work and the product they're trying to build. What is the best place to spend our time, and what projects we should be working on most, I think is becomes important then, because as I said, there's a huge demand for data scientist time, I think, in every company, and so choosing where we spend that time wisely, I think, becomes the key challenge and the important decisions for, especially for a head of data science like myself, then to make sure we're best using the team's capacity then.